We've seen the kind of political patronage playing out, feeding into this corrupt animal that we now have.
I think parties unfortunately run like a business.
And that's the thing, I mean, the funding, where your money comes from, is a very important part, because we know then where your intention and your motivation is.
I know like in the States they've got like your lobbyists where you will have the gun people very specifically, you know, tied to that. But here that's more corruption direction, you know, it's like we don't have a very structured way of creating that funding or managing those funds. So even if there was a fund, I'd probably be like, yeah.
I think it's interesting because I feel like, for example, if DA has been funded by a racist person who believes all blacks should die, I'd like to know about that. If ANC is funded by someone who believes that black people are the ultimate race, that there should not be any more white people in the world, I should know about that. And if EFF is the same, so I would like to know if someone is definitely, who funds someone, because I want to know who gives them the money.
There's also something around the idea of a party not wanting to be associated with money. It almost seems like a dirty relationship. So all of these lovely t-shirts and these campaigns and these rallies, they just happen through the air, giving us this wonderful opportunity, because money in politics are always seen as a kind of, well, how come you could afford that, you know? So parties are not inclined to talk about their finances, because now suddenly they become seen as corporate or labeled in a negative way. So I do think that there is a deliberate avoidance of talking about where your funding comes from, but also because voters are not informed, so therefore it isn't something that's triggering their responses. But also because you need a lot of background to understand, you can't necessarily make an easy, quick judgment call as to whether a funder is a good or bad funder. Is Big Pharma bad or good? You know, is being funded by a pharmacy company a bad thing or a good thing? It's difficult to make that judgment call as an individual without a lot of, which is why you need free press, media, documentaries, information.
If you're going to get money from,
so for instance,
say from a warmonger, somebody that's weapons, blah blah blah, I know that you're going to have to align, because why would someone invest in you without expecting a payback of some sort? Because we see that overseas, we see that with like USA with the NRA
like, you make
and gun control. I mean, it's clear that they need better gun laws, but they won't budge. Why? Because the NRA is making them money, and the NRA is paying individuals that make the decisions also.
The President yesterday signed into law the Political Party Funding Act. The Electoral Commission welcomes this ascension to the Act as another historic milestone in the continuing entrenchment of electoral democracy in our country, and will serve to enhance the transparency and help ensure an informed electorate into the future.
Many a times what you have is not the political party that gets funded, but it's individuals who will get funded by people. And they don't reveal, because it's all these things come in black bags also, or brown envelopes, so I don't know.
I'm Terry-Crawforde Browne, anti-arms deal activist, former banker turned revolutionary, troublemaker. Well, no country in the world has resolved corruption and party funding. But the arms trade is notoriously corrupt. It's probably responsible for an estimated 45% of all corruption, because people at large do not buy weapons as politicians, and who buy weapons with taxpayers' money. And so they're influenced by arms dealers and governments. And I was involved because I was representing the Anglican Church in Parliament during the 1996-1998 Defence Review. And there the Defence White Paper said there is no conceivable foreign military threat to the country. The threat is poverty. We must put everything we can into education, health, job creation, housing and so forth. And that was our position as well.
Before the ANC government decided to upgrade its ageing apartheid-era military hardware. But questions were soon asked around whether the multi-billion-dollar price tag was excessive, whether the fighter jets and submarines were really needed.
But the European governments and arms companies put massive pressure on the South African government to buy warships, warplanes we didn't need, couldn't afford, but they dressed it up with the idea that if you spend 30 billion rand, it'll create 110 billion rand in offsets that will create 65,000 jobs.
The overall view in the country, including in Parliament, unanimously in Parliament, that indeed we needed re-equipping the Defence Force in the manner that was visualized. we then proceeded to go ahead with the procurement process.
As I say, I come to this from a banking background, so you could smell the corruption. And before long, the evidence started to come in ahead of the 1999 election. I was asked to speak at a seminar organized by NUMSA, the trade union, and they were under huge pressure from Denel shop stewards to support the arms deal, and because of gear they were very suspicious. And they said that, they told me, this was 98, that BAE was laundering bribes via 2 Swedish trade unions to ANC members of parliament ahead of the 1999 election. I got confirmation in Sweden, in contents there, but they said now the shutters are closed. They're transferring these funds through these 2 trade unions, and it's dressed up as funding for an industrial trade school. But it's nothing of the sort, it's bribes. So through campaigning against arms trade in London, I asked the British government to investigate, and Scotland Yard was appointed to investigate, and it eventually came back. It was not illegal in English law to bribe foreigners, and therefore there was no crime for Scotland Yard to investigate, which was true in 98-99. And in Germany, the bribes were tax deductible as a business expense, useful business expense. So there was an awful lot of bribery. Foreigners were fair game for bribes. Now, it is now illegal, but of course there's no enforcement of the illegality. So the man who actually facilitated the transfer of those bribes, in 1998 he was the international relations officer for the Chemical and Metal Workers Union in Sweden, but he went up in the world. He became the Prime Minister of Sweden in 2012. He's just lost office about 6 months ago. But that's how high it goes. And Tony Blair was hugely involved. As recently as 2016, after the Sereti Commission report found there was nothing wrong with corruption in the arms deal, I employed some international lawyers to see if we could take this up in the States, because BAE had been fined $400 million in the States in 2010 by the Department of Justice, and another $79 million in 2011, and they should have been disbarred from tendering for US government business, which would have put them into bankruptcy. But the disbarment certificate was simultaneously rescinded by Hillary Clinton's Assistant Secretary of State for Military Political Relations against a sizable donation to the Clinton Foundation from Saudi Arabia. So that's how far it goes. I mean, the governments are hugely corrupt, particularly in terms of the arms trade.
If a party wants to get funded by an arms dealer, that's entirely their choice. It doesn't even have to be seen as unethical if that party doesn't think it's unethical. In a democracy, unless there are laws or the constitution forbids you being funded by an arms dealer. But otherwise, there's nothing wrong with a party taking money from an arms dealer unless they think it's a reputational risk. So again, this is where we really got to see the power has to come back to the citizen, the voter. That's where transparency is important, but it's not necessarily going to change the electoral landscape.
ANC intelligence operatives came to me in 1999 to say, you're talking about corruption around offsets. We'll tell you where the real corruption is. And it's not just the arms deal, it's oil deals, and it's toll roads, and it's driver's licenses, and it's drug money, and it's money laundering. And the common denominator to this is 10% kickback to the ANC for political protection. So, we'll close our eyes as long as we get a kickback. So, for instance, we all have to pay to renew our driver's licenses, which the driver's licenses continue to be run by the sheikhs. And there's a kickback to the ANC when we renew our driver's licenses. Or Hitachi had a connection with Chancellor House, kickback to the ANC. When you switch on the lights, you're funding the ANC. And so it's become so rampant. And this was 99, when ANC intelligence, they'd left the country in '85. They'd been highly trained in the Soviet Union. They'd seen what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed, and you had these apparatchiks who suddenly became billionaires, and they said, that's not why we went into exile, to see the same thing happen in South Africa. And sadly, that is what has happened. They've followed the example of what happened in Russia, and people who were penniless are now millionaires and billionaires. And you've got people living in appalling circumstances, poorer now than they were 20 years ago.
Like, we look at corruption now in our country and we go, oh, corruption's a problem. But why is it a problem? Because they're people. Because they came from nothing. Now you're offering them millions to do. You just pass this letter on there. That's all you must do. Here's R1 million to pass the letter on. That's all you must do. Obviously, people that come from nothing is going to take it.
I don't think they're bad people, but money can corrupt anyone. I think everyone has a price. If you think you don't have a price, you've never been offered 20 million rand. Huh?
I mean, it's been suggested that maybe the EF gets... one time they were footsie-footsying with Mugabe. How much it came that way, I don't know. Yeah, because I can't imagine many businessmen funding the EFF, but who knows. And the DA, one assumes property developers. And some people will cover their bets on both sides. But I don't think there would be many ANC funders who would support the DA. Maybe, maybe not.
Let me also add that another funder that the DA had in the acknowledgement was the Guptas also.
Sure.
Helen Zille has written to them thanking them for 2009 election donation.
The DA, like the ANC, has refused to disclose their funders. Mm-hmm. And this is the need to open up the transparency and maybe reduce the perks of office because there's such a scramble now for jobs, and because you're a public official, then you've got a public car, you've got a house, and all the perks, etc., etc. So we're also seeing assassinations because someone wants the councillor's job. Murder Incorporated, particularly in KZN. So we've got to scale it down instead of this idea that once you're in politics, it's the avenue from being a millionaire.
The motivation for party funding by the funders, like any other business, it's like an investment banker. Like, they are funding because they want to see a return on investment. That return on investment is policy change that makes the practices of their business cheaper, more efficient, and more profitable. And that's a problem, because that's not what the government should be doing. They are not a private business. They should be enacting what's best for the people that voted them in, not for the companies that are giving them money.
Are many people voting without a lot of access to information, or not having being influenced by even fake news? Absolutely, absolutely. But are many South Africans actually pretty engaged, pretty knowledgeable, and do a lot of their own thinking and reading and talking? Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we're known for being a country where people take politics seriously. And so I think, yes, many are voting blind. But I think we can't forget those who have got a long history of decades and decades of being deeply engaged in politics. And so they may not be getting all the information that they want or deserve to have, but they're not blind. Maybe South Africans are voting partially sighted. How about that?